Hello, and welcome to Thank You Five, a weekly show hosted by Strawdog Theatre Company, where we talk with a variety of theater artists about all things theater. My name is Becca, and I'll be your host tonight. I am a theater maker, educator, and stage manager, and have been working with Strawdog since 2015 and have been an ensemble member since 2018. Tonight, we are joined by four incredible theater artists. Before we answer our first question, let's have everyone go around and introduce yourselves. I'm getting a signal from Kyle, our producer. Are we okay with sound?
We've got an echo that I'm trying to track down. Do you hear it on your end, or are you good?
I don't hear it. I think we're all right. Everyone else okay?
So let's keep
All
going.
right. Amazing. So we're going to go around and introduce ourselves. You'll also see that there are bios in the YouTube information on our channel. Speaking of our YouTube channel, please subscribe if you haven't yet. So let's go around and do intros, and I'll call folks one by one and let us know who you are, where you're calling from, and what kind of theater you make. So Alex, let's start with you.
Sure, there's that echo. It's pretty sweet. All right. Goodman. I am the managing director of Oceanside Theatre Company in Oceanside, California, just north of San Diego. We are in the land of the Kumeyaay and Luiseno people. And I make theater possible, having been away from making theater for probably 15 years. That's me.
Thanks, Alex. Eric, let's zip over to you.
I'm Eric Phillips, and I'm a stage designer and theater educator. I've been teaching at a small liberal arts college and creating theater here in Arkansas for the last 30 years.
Thanks, Eric. And Terry?
Hello, I am Terry Lynn Hudson. I use she, her pronouns. I am located in Chicago, and I am an actor and performance artist and multidisciplinary artist. And I am also a disability access advocate. And I perform in whatever medium is accessible to me. And currently that is virtually.
Thanks, Terry. And last but not least, Jared.
Hi, my name is Jared Sproles. I use he, him pronouns. I consider myself a Chicago playwright. However, I'm currently in Tempe, Arizona, getting my MFA in dramatic writing at ASU, where at the moment I'm taking some time to specifically do some research and writing around Jewish sexuality.
Amazing. Thank you all for your intro. So we're going to jump right in with our first question. This is the question we start with every week, and that is very simple. Well, it's simple, but not so simple. What is theater? And we have our first response from Eric. Eric, what is theater?
Theater to me is story to begin with. You know, when I first discovered theater, I was 13 years old and went to one of my cousin's college theater productions, and I was really amazed by this story, but also this world up on stage. And as I've continued in theater and in teaching all this time, I liked several different ways that people have talked about what theater is. And Suzanne Langer, who's an art philosopher, says that theater protects us from inner and outer chaos because it is this imaginary world outside of ours where it's safe for us to explore. And yet at the same time, like Picasso said, it's a lie that tells the truth. It's a fiction, but there are these powerful things that we're learning. Another person I heard said that theater is a place where we can ask questions, where many voices can speak to those, and a place where those many voices have a chance to be heard. And so I enjoy that about theater too.
Amazing. Thank you, Eric. Alex, what is theater to you?
Great question. Thanks for asking, Becca. The it's complicated, right? Theater is a lot of things. Theater is made up of different elements. You can look at the, story and voice and scenic elements and all those kinds of things. The thing that I'm most interested in at this point in my career is the conversation that theater allows us to have with the community. And so it is really the relationship between audience and performance that resonates with me immensely right now. And so to that extent, my idea of what theater is and can be has changed quite a bit in recent years. And so at my theater, we have started to do a lot more music, improv, stand-up comedy, dance, really bringing in a lot of different disciplines to bring the community together. Because at the end of the day, when we have this kind of nonprofit charity status, it really is this element of like, how are we serving the community? And so for me right now, it's really like, how are we dealing with that question of how are we engaging the community in conversation about who we are? I think there's an Oscar Wilde quote about like, theater is the most immediate way for a conversation around that question of who we are as a community. So that's where I'm at today with that question.
Thanks so much, Alex. I'm noticing that we're bringing a lot of quotes from others about what theater is and maybe is not, and what we think of theater. So I'm curious to maybe come back to that once everyone's given their answer to this first question. But before that, Terry, what is theater to you?
To me, well, first of all, I don't have a quote. I did not prepare a quote. So my definition is coming more from my gut. And what my gut is telling me is that theater is a heightened reflection of our reality, our emotions, and our world. And it can be heightened in different ways. There can be stylistic heightening. There can be just the concentration of, we have to tell this whole story of these people's lives in 2 hours. And so what are the points that we have to hit? What makes this the 2 hours that we have to talk about? Or what makes this a span of time that we're condensing into 2 hours that we have to talk about? And it is a reflection of community. It is a reflection of culture. It is a reflection of demographic. It's a reflection of who we are and who the theater is for.
Beautiful. Thank you, Terry. And Jared, what's theater to you?
Well, I feel like I keep hearing a lot of sort of academic conversations that, in full transparency, Becca and I are in the same program here and have been talking about a lot recently to echo what I said echo, and that was triggering. But I see it as a playwright, as a space to ask questions, and have been diving into the ways that we return to those questions time and time again. As with each new day and passes, we realize that there are new ways to answer that question, or new ways that we must answer that question for a better future, for a more equitable way of living. And I also think about how theater is rooted in ritual and in gathering, and that it's a space for us primarily to gather together, to share space. Also for the ideas not just to be intellectual, but to also be embodied, and to bring our full body, voice, spectacle, and spirit to the space, and share that with others.
Thank you. Thank you all for your answers, and thanks to everyone for bearing with some figuring out tech with some new software we're playing with over here. I feel like a DJ. So we usually spend a large chunk of our time in Thank You Five talking about this question, what is theater? I heard a lot of really exciting things from this group. I heard, like I said, quotes. I heard community repeated, heightened stories, asking questions, ritual, and gathering. I'm curious what you all heard, and this is a more open-ended, wielding conversation to pop in if you've got something to say, but what you all heard and what maybe resonated with you, or you want to talk about a little bit more on this question of what is theater?
Well, I can say a little bit about the ritual part of things. That's something that is definitely I'm drawn to, and that's something that was kind of thrown on its head with being forced into a digital space. That the ritual of going to the theater and sharing space with others in an organic response to what's happening on stage, that disappeared in a way that I think was really affecting in a million ways, right? If nothing else, the fact that this thing that we've been doing for thousands of years, we took away a core element of it, which was just sharing space. And that part of the ritual is, in my opinion, impossible to replicate in a digital space. So if we can't replicate it, what can we do? And so that's, I think, one of the big questions that I'm still faced with. And here in San Diego, like, we never really solved when we were shut down. But how do you embrace a digital world and try to maintain or replicate or modify that ritual in a way that's still satisfying in a theater way? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's something I wrestle with a lot.
Yeah, Eric, I see your hand up as well with some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I was going to respond to the idea of community, because I think that's been a big part of my exploration of what theater is as I've moved through in my career. Because at first I started out and I want to be in this world that's up there. But the longer that I work in it and work with students in it, you're thinking about, well, what does this do for us? Why is what we do really critical to us as humans? And that idea of community comes back again and again. And I'm in the South. I'm in a very conservative place. And so I'm in a place where we're presenting for a community on this small campus that we have to think of, where is our community and where would we like them to be with some of our questions and some of our messages, and where are we going to close them down completely from thinking if we go here, or where can we work this back and forth? And this idea of seeing someone else's story told in that community sense is something that's, kept me really intrigued about theater, and a constant changing set of people that you work with or communities that you are trying to present with and for, that dynamic is always there. And that's part of kind of what Alex was talking about in this live experience, and Jared in the ritual sort of idea of being together. And that was a real challenge during COVID when we were trying to work on that. And we have a 10-minute play festival that we do at our university that is an all-night theater called. It's over the weekend. They get their scripts, they've written them, they get directors and go through. And we did all that digitally live. We cast them and they rehearsed on there and tried to do all of that. And of course, it wasn't the same, but it was a victory to try to have that community there just a little bit with everything else shut down.
Yeah, definitely thinking on community and what has changed about community with the pandemic, with COVID. it is a victory even to gather online. Even what we're doing right now is a communal victory of meeting new artists, seeing artists we've seen before, talking about theater in this way. Jared or Terry, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on either still this question of what is theater, responding to what other folks have been saying?
I guess I'm thinking about, especially Terry mentioning this idea of access, right, which has become such a huge question, sort of spurred by COVID in a very physical way, but also has to do with conversations around inequity in general in our country, right? And the way that white supremacy is baked into our institutions and has made these rituals less accessible to the community that we hope to reach and are surrounded by. And in some spaces, I feel like I so often find the virtual sharing to be different than what I'm accustomed to. And I also hear us naming the ways in which it has opened doors for some people to access theater and the arts and connect across, whether within a city or across state lines, right, nationally, in the way that maybe we had limited ourselves and before, and thinking about as we're still in this process of opening our doors back up for live performance that I know still feels very new to me, even though it feels so long ago and yet so close all at the same time. Just holding some of those questions and learnings close, right, as questions that we continue to bring into the theater that we make and how we decide to operate.
I definitely want to say that, when we talk about how changing from the way that we had previously been doing theater, I'm sorry, from the way we had previously been doing theater to having to do it with different media because of the pandemic. And when I talk about access, what this brings up for me is thinking about the ways in which theater has worked for, on both the performative and the audience side, a fairly specific demographic of people for the time that it's been working. And it's excluded other demographics of people this entire time. And I think that having to transition to digital during the pandemic opened doors for people while closing doors for other people. And with the people who found doors closed to them, I feel like a lot of that was attitude, to be perfectly honest, and feeling like, well, if I can't do it the way that I'm used to doing it, it's not worth doing. And with people who were suddenly finding a way into either viewing or performing that they had not had access to before, you suddenly had this new thing that people were able to do, or this hurdle that people previously had been facing that was broken down. When you talk about disabled performers, we just got a disabled performer on Broadway less than 10 years ago for the very first time. And I think a lot of people weren't aware of that, and that's a huge inequity in the industry. And people being able to perform from their homes with mobility or fatigue issues, people being able to watch from their homes when they wouldn't have been able to get away from home for X amount of hours of time without access to a certain sort of chair or easy access to a bathroom or something like that. It was a huge world changer and game changer for a lot of people to have virtual access. And that just needs to be kept in mind when people talk about how many things were taken away from the normalcy of everything, because the normal wasn't working for a whole lot of people.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Terry. And I think about that a lot, about it's so easy to focus on what was taken away, like the negative part of things, that it's really important to refocus on, well, what opportunity does this give us? and who is welcome to the table now that wasn't welcome before. And I think that's tremendous. I still absolutely struggle with the landscape of media that's available to people. And when someone can pay $8 a month for Hulu or Netflix or whatever it is, as an arts administrator, as a theater manager, I struggle with the monetization of it. Like, how do we charge a fee that will allow us to pay the performers what they're worth, and make that whole financial balance part of things work out? And when someone can turn on Hulu and have hundreds of hours of entertainment accessible to them, that's going to look better than anything that we can probably produce in a theater world. I really struggle with the competition part of it. Competition aside, there were some really creative and powerful things that happened during this time of what are we going to do next, when the doors to the theaters were closed. And I hope that we can continue to do both to the extent that we can, figure out how to invite people to the table that were previously excluded, and as much as we can return to that. The part of theater that is most interesting to me, again, is that heartbeats lining up in a room together, and breathing together in a room. And when you're talking about a virus that is spread by people being in a dark room and breathing together, right? It's tragic. And so I'm still very interested in figuring out how to do both. And I think a lot of theaters around the country are still playing with that idea of how do you pay for it, which is a really difficult part of the equation, but it is an integral part of the equation of the sustainability of the form.
The sustainability, and then the longevity of like what comes next. Where are we going with the form as well? Yeah. And I know something where we've been playing with at Strawdog, particularly with Herschel. We've been doing live streams of the show. And so Jared mentioned I'm in Phoenix now as well. And to be able to stay connected to Strawdog from so far away, it's been a huge benefit for me. And so I think something that I've been thinking a lot about is, these changes help everyone in different ways. Not only are they providing access to folks who've never had it or have had it in ways that have been compromising to them for their health reasons or safety reasons or physical needs. They're helpful for everyone in different ways too. And so, it's the good of the longevity of the form and staying connected perhaps as well. This really dovetails beautifully into our next question, which is more explicitly, what have you learned from the pandemic? So this was a question posed on our channel here. I'm curious, coming off of that last conversation, more explicitly, what have you learned from the pandemic, theater-wise in particular? And this is open to anyone to jump on in.
I'll start off with kind of talking from our university kind of perspective. Of course, we're a campus already, so that we have a population that's very close together and susceptible to things. But it's also been kind of challenging from an academic point of view to try to talk with administration about things and have them to understand that our industry completely shut down. Lots of industries had to change the way they were operating. But we had 2 past students who were in shows on Broadway, and they were suddenly out of work. And that's just, everybody was out of that. But as we started to kind of work with an interesting thing in terms of not having to have people come to campus, one thing that was interesting was starting to work with licensing companies who are now scrambling because live theater can't happen. How are we going to continue to get licensing fees and our shows done? And they were creating platforms for us to be able to pay for streaming licensing, so that we were able to have parents and grandparents and people who could have never come because they're across the nation be able to come and see these shows. Another thing was really reaching out to a lot of our alumni. And as some were saying, you know, we can kind of forget that we're connected everywhere and we're kind of focused in. So even this past semester, as we were coming off, we had two past students, one who's just come off of the show in Broadway, one who's in New Orleans doing a lot of television work, teach the auditioning class. And they said, we can do this because even our guy on Broadway said, I haven't done a live audition in 2 years. It's all been tape. And so these students were able to have these people that we wouldn't have thought before, okay, we can't have them travel here. But because of the technology that had to so rapidly develop during that COVID time, we've really had some opportunities for these alum to connect back with our current students and be in New York or New Orleans a little bit and kind of connect with what it's like to be trying to work in those networks.
Yeah, you're breaking down walls within a community, which is the best thing we can do, right? That's what we've been trying to do with theater forever, that it's all about kind of finding the commonalities and the things that bring us together as opposed to the things that separate us and make us different. So that moment of figuring out, oh, this is actually an opportunity to bring people to our students that were previously inaccessible is an amazing privilege that we learned through this moment. It's awesome.
I guess I think about the learnings that came from slowing down and having space to think about our processes without worrying about product for a moment. And of course, we're now returning to a place where once again, we are so often product oriented because there are, whether it be subscribers or donors or powers that be, that want the reliability of certain shows chosen at certain times. And of course, there have to be rights and contracts to be negotiated and certain schedules and logistics to be figured out. And of course, there is a certain benefit to planning far ahead, to packaging deals and shows together and working from this season structure that so often is what we've done as nonprofits. And yet I've been thinking about or wondering how we can move to a space that is process oriented and focused, and that we share the product when we are ready to, and that we have tools that and resources that are malleable for that, and that shows or theater can run for as long as it like to, or be done when it's ready to be done.
How we can move to a space that is
myself on a delay, which is weird.
Oriented, focused, and that we share
so important.
The product
hear it
when
a
we're
second time until okay. But so yeah, and sort of putting the power back into the artist's hands a little bit, but also not in a way that's, you know, just like people pulling against each other for resources, but in a way that's truly collaborative. Because also so often I find that people want to be a part of the process. That is why they engage with and support the arts. And so they're actually excited by the theater of the process. And how can we sort of show them that, live into that, and maybe move to a space that's also then more accessible as well, in terms of when someone or some people need more time, there is time to be had, right? And we don't just rush to finish the thing because we must, but we present it when we are ready to. So I don't know, not a lot of answers around that, but hopes that I have, and stuff that I at least feel better sort of holding on to in my own smaller processes for the time being.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel almost the opposite of what you're talking about, Jared, in as much as here in San Diego, in California, and I assume throughout much of the rest of the country, there's recent law that passed around how we pay artists, right? Historically, a lot of theaters have paid 1099, a stipend for your time, you agree upon it. And now we are, because of AB5, we're forced to pay everybody minimum wage. Minimum wage is not a bad thing. Minimum wage is a good thing. But it is much more expensive for us to take time. And so we have found that theater is more expensive than ever to produce, just on a human resources level, which is part of the reason why we have started to look to how can we diversify. Like, we always want to do theater. Theater is a core part of our mission, but how do we look into presenting music acts and stand-up and academic lectures, and like really thinking outside the box about what a performing arts organization can be, who we can serve. And that's allowed us to start to look to the local ballet folklorico company, who had previously not been on a main stage at a theater at all, right? We hosted our first hip hop show that sold out. Like, we had people in our space that would never have walked through our doors before. But when we start thinking about theater in a much more broad sense of performance, art, culture, that allowed us to reach new audiences. And because we're bringing partners to the stage that have created something in their own time, we are paying them for the time and the space, and we are selling tickets for that thing, but it is much more affordable to produce for a one night only thing, instead of the 6 weeks of rehearsals for 4 weeks of performance that it takes to make theater, which is just inherently more expensive. And there's actors, there's designers, there's directors, there's a lot of people that need to be compensated, and rightfully so. And we want to do that. We just haven't figured out how to charge an admission fee that matches what it costs to make it as effectively. I think a lot of theaters are currently faced with this problem of a perfect storm of theaters more expensive to produce. Audiences are reticent to return because there's still health concerns. There's still all sorts of other issues at play that are preventing them from coming back. And how do we survive? So I have looked internally of like, okay, let's change what it is we do. Let's just lift the roof, lift the tent, so that more things can live under this idea of no longer theater for me, but performing arts and culture, community conversation.
Alex, go ahead, Terry, please.
I definitely just wanted to jump on what was just said there, because I'll say this. In 2020, I worked more than I had worked the previous 6 years I had lived in Chicago. And to me, that's a really telling story, considering that I am a mobility impaired actor, about access. I can only physically access, I think, about 2/3, maybe. I think it might even be the opposite, and 1/3 of the storefronts in Chicago. Either their stage or their rehearsal space or their audition space is inaccessible, or all three are. And what I learned in 2020, and what a lot of disabled people learned in 2020, is people really figure out access when it starts to affect everybody and not just us. And what I would like people to take away from that is that, okay, we now know that you can do a virtual show or a podcast play or a show where you have different people who are maybe zoomed in or otherwise, tele whatevered in from different locations as one character in your play, even if other people in the play are live. And let's just keep that energy. I mean, I think that if we could create paths to equity somehow for all of the non-equity disabled artists I know, because there's not work for us that involved maybe doing a podcast show with an equity theater or being one character who is pre-recorded or zoomed in to an equity show or something like that, that would be a really great way to make there be more equity. And I think that one thing that I've been pushing for as an activist is going to all these different theaters and going, okay, maybe not in your main stage, but maybe in your like studio or underground or garage productions, let there be a podcast show. Let there be a virtual show. You can do this. You have the technology. Unless you threw everything away at the end of 2020, you've got people on staff who know how to do this. You've got equipment to do this. You need to keep doing it and maybe not replace everything you're wanting to get back to with live theater, but add to it. There's got to be space for more than one avenue of performance, more than one avenue of audience growth, and more than one avenue of access towards a professional career.
What's really exciting that I'm hearing both from Alex and Terry, I'm like these two different but like parallel lanes, is abundance. I feel like we were coming from this space of deficit, this space of there's a hole in the community, there's a hole in access, there's a hole in what and how we can do theater. And like Alex, you're talking about your organization becoming an arts and culture hub in your community. And Terry, you're talking about every organization finding ways to like blow open their structures in the ways that they had to and rebuild them in ways that are more equitable and accessible. And that's just really exciting. Is there anything else we want to share on this? What have you learned from the pandemic question? Anything else bubbling up for anyone? This is the educator in me, always the teacher wait time. Okay, let's go on. We'll move on to our next question. This comes from Camille Dawkins, our artistic director at Strawdog. She asks, what are ways you see theater changing? What are ways you see theater changing? Eric, is that a hand raise or is that the old hand raise? I can't tell. That's the new hand raise. Awesome.
That's the new one back. I figured out how to lower it now, so now something that I've seen, and it's not just with what's happening with the pandemic, but it just seems to be a cultural thing, and that's happening in a lot of the arts, and it has to do with disability and just other marginalized groups, has to do with representation. And again, being in the South and being in a small place, this is really an interesting dilemma, but a powerful thing that's happening in terms of having people represented on stage as characters and as actors that are allowing people to see in a community. Yeah, you can go on and watch a sitcom and there they are. Yeah, I know. But to have it, oh, this is someone in my community, or a character being created in my community where I have to kind of think about and discuss how we are. I think that's a really powerful thing, and something that playwrights, of course, are working toward, and that theaters are as well, in terms of, and of course, being in an educational place, we want to ask those questions. And they make our administrators awfully nervous sometimes. But finding that line and trying to think of, yes, this is an opportunity for us to deal with this. This is for, especially, I have two sons who are in college, and for their generation, this sense of identity is critical. And theater is a place, again, where we can tell these stories where it's a little safer. It's a little bit separated from reality.
I think about the way that I maybe hope that theater is remembering that it is meant to be a space of gathering, and that extends beyond when a show is happening, and that extends beyond people being physically in a space together, right, as we've been sharing, and that even extends beyond perhaps gathering in the building that the institution is housed in, but that a theater can be a space for activism, to house voting during the day, to house artists having coffee or lunch when they're in the neighborhood, or to welcome in people on a hot day and have water. You know, like it is a resource beyond when the curtain opens and the curtain closes. And that so often we think about all of those interactions with a dollar sign next to it. Well, what does that mean? Instead of hopefully moving into, as you were naming, Becca, this place of abundance, that by welcoming people in beyond a paid ticket for entry, right, for a specific product, but really in a space that's building relationship, that's welcoming in the community and the city to be part of the cultural activity and the needs of the community, means that people become invested in so much more than just, I show up, I see a play, perhaps I'm entertained, and I go home, and I keep that in its little box that theater is meant to be. I feel, for me, it's been weird in being in grad school lately, being removed from my normal theater community, and seeing how much that is playing out or not, but hoping that, definitely seeing some discussions around that in our little community here, and hope that can be something that we continue to think about.
I wanted to kind of jump in there again with that, just because it reminded me of, my wife is a librarian, and the nature of libraries are changing enormously in the same way that theater is having to deal with this. Information is at your fingertips. And of course, correctly using that information and weeding through is a whole nother challenge. But libraries, it's so nice to see libraries turning into these places where people who don't have access to things, whether it's actually books anymore, are able to gather and are able to reach these things and be involved with different things that are there. So it's exciting to hear that idea that theater is a space that's maybe sitting there, not used a lot, depending on rehearsals and things, and yet it can be incorporated as something that is still very community driven in what those things are.
Yeah, I appreciate that idea, Eric. And it's like the what is it from the Avengers movie of Asgard is not a place, it is a people, right? And like, I think theater we often think of as a building, right? And like, and how are we using that building in order to serve the community? And so one of the things that's interesting to me is we've done a lot more collaborating with other theaters, with non-theater organizations like the library, like dance companies, organizations 45 minutes away or an hour and a half away, where we're bringing something that they've created to a new audience, and serving our community in that way by exposing them to something new. I think collaborations are something we're going to see a lot more of going forward. I think that a virtual world lends itself to that in a way that is wonderful, and we have to kind of embrace that thing. That one of the things that's always been attractive to me of theater making is that it's inherently collaborative, right? That like you have a director and designers and actors and a playwright, and everybody comes together and you make something that didn't exist before, and then it's ephemeral, it goes away when it's over, but that collaboration is built in, and so how do we lean into that? How do we have more collaboration? How do we collaborate with non-traditional partners? How do we collaborate outside of our market? How do we collaborate outside of our community? And how do we bring more people to the table? Is another thing that I've been very interested in these past couple of years.
I absolutely love all of that. I also really have been watching how much harder people have pushed for equity in casting and accurate representation in casting. And I really feel like a lot of artists have just kind of gotten to a place where, in a bad way, they maybe feel like they have nothing to lose, but also in a good way, they feel like they have nothing to lose, or that they have already lost so much that it's like we're already standing on this precipice, so we might as well keep pushing, might as well ask for the moon. If we don't miss it, if we miss it, we'll just get some stars. And I'm really loving just the push for more accurate representation, more respectful representation, watching people, turn down stereotypical offensive sorts of roles and push for more, body diversity and ability diversity, and, don't just have an equity audition and then 3 years later we have, oh, we finally need one of you. It's like, no, we could be doctors, we could be lawyers, we could be romantic leads. You need to get outside of the boxes that you keep thinking of putting everyone in. I did a virtual production of Romeo and Juliet where we had a fat Juliet, and she was beautiful and she was bubbly and she was fantastic in the role. And this is someone who would not have traditionally gotten cast as a Juliet. And the fact that we got to do that was amazing. And it, I think, really just pushed through this box of like, why does an ingenue have to be, this size 0 little gamine person? It doesn't have to be. And the fact that we did it virtually, I think, made it possibly go down a little easier, much as it has with a lot of disability representation, because you don't see my whole body right now. You don't see my orthotics, but I guarantee you that they're there. And that's the sort of observation that I was making about, okay, all of these theaters suddenly want to work with me because they're only dealing with this part of me. And I can feel like that's an offensive thing, but it's also kind of this superpower that I've developed. And I think that, we can lean into doing that, but also looking at that critically and going, okay, if it doesn't bother me to see this person's body existing in this little box, maybe it shouldn't bother me to see their entire body on a stage, because you know what? Some people look like that and suck it up.
Yeah, that brings up for me, so the internet's amazing, right? It does amazing things for us. It also gives voice to trolls in a way that is obnoxious, if nothing else. We did a non-traditional production of the Nutcracker that incorporated non-binary performers. There were pregnant performers. It was a really interesting show in a lot of ways, and we used the word non-binary in our marketing, and we had some people take offense to that word, right? Like, how dare you with the children, like, how dare you? And it was such a weird moment for us as an organization to think about. We're doing exactly what we said we wanted to do. We're being as inclusive as we're intending to be, and that's a problem for a very vocal minority. And how do you let the conversation happen without stoking the fire and not censoring it, but allowing it, right? Like, there's really interesting things that happen within that part of things. But it's interesting to experience the wonder and the connection of the internet and the shittiness of some people who choose to participate in shitty ways. This is still PG-13. I can say shitty, right? That's okay, probably. I don't know.
Depends on the teacher that might be showing this to their students, I guess. We'll put like a little asterisk on the description.
I think that makes me think about part of the work I do along with being an artist is anti-racism training with Crossroads organizing and training. CROAR is the Chicago branch, which certain theaters have worked with, but I think so often or perhaps sometimes there's a trend to not take accountability for our audiences, to say like, oh, well, they're going to act how they're going to act and we can't control them, right? They, as opposed to saying like, actually, we are benefiting from those people being in our space. So if we're going to benefit from their resources, we also need to be accountable to how they show up, whether that be in person or virtually, and be willing to risk losing those resources so that harm is not done by those people, and hopefully live into the abundance of all of the resources that we will gain from that level of accountability, and for standing up for what is equitable, what is safe and inclusive. So I hope that's another trend that we're moving towards as well, or at least that I hope to see.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the fascinating things about this internet, is that somebody could be trolling us from Anchorage, right, with like no intention of participating in the art that we're creating, but they've decided to engage in a way to make their voice heard. And it's just a fascinating part of the system that is so powerful in connecting us, and also we have to account for the darker sides of it. And thank you, Jerry, for bringing it up, that idea of the benefit that we gain from both the people participating as audience and as performers, and how are we protecting people, and how are we benefiting from their participation. There is, I believe, a responsibility as an arts organization to engage a community of artists and art lovers and creators in civil discussion, whatever that means. And I don't know if I've figured out the part of how do you shy away from censorship while not allowing harm to happen in the same way. And I think it's a really tricky wicket. It's a difficult thing to thread the needle of. I'd be really interested to hear how anybody else has dealt with that idea of allowing conversation that is perhaps unpalatable, but still a part of the community discussion, for better or for worse. Like, how do you navigate it?
I mean, I know I'll share in a discussion I was having at the theater I worked at full time before the pandemic. Is one of the things I know the theater was a bit averse to, was sort of being race conscious in the way we were doing public programming, or even in the way we were doing post-show discussions, and that and oftentimes too, that those discussions were being put on one person in particular, either a white moderator who, for people of color, they perhaps would not feel represented and or welcomed into that conversation, or for a person of color moderating, feel that the entire weight of that conversation, right, is on them. And instead, what would it be, again, to live into the both and of making resources for both a white facilitator and a person of color to be together in that space, or to be race aware in a way that says, hey, perhaps there is a conversation for just white people to have, and for just people of color to have, to maintain the integrity, and at least hopefully maybe get a step closer to people feeling that they can be vulnerable in a space with people who they have probably not met with before. And sometimes just naming that naming that our audience is not a monolith, and that different people have different needs, is the first step. And then people being open to say, this is what I need from this space, and let's see how we can get a step closer to doing that. And if we're not able to do it right away, not make an excuse for why it's not right, but make it a priority for something that we still hope to do in the future, and be accountable to that.
Thank you for that. I am aware of time, and I, in the spirit of equity and access and all of the wonderful things about the internet and that we've learned from the pandemic, do want to be respectful of your time because it is getting late. And I want to say that we didn't explicitly ask this question from Laura in Beaumont, but we really did talk about it. So I just want to thank Laura for putting it in. I'm wondering if you all saw it in our chat. But Laura had asked, is theater a good way to expose the struggles around access? And I would add diversity, equity, and inclusion as well, and start a broader conversation. And we started that broader conversation in this small space, which is really exciting. And I hope we can continue it in the future. Is there anything anyone would like to say before we close out our Thank You 5 for the evening? Awesome. Well, thank you so much to all of you, you excellent panelists, Eric and Alex and Terry and Jared, who are here with us tonight. Thank you for Kyle, Strawdog Ensemble member, tech extraordinaire, for creating and producing Thank You 5. Thank you to officehours.global and DVE Store. Thank You 5 is made possible by Strawdog Theatre Company ensemble members and artists in our community. Strawdog is run on a free theater model where our productions are available to anyone and everyone. And we can only do that with generous donations from our community. So anyone watching, you can find information about donating or becoming a Strawdog member and helping to continuously support our work at strawdog.org. So thank you to you all for participating, and thanks to anyone who is watching, and we hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.